At my husband's funeral, while the casket was still open and my hands still shaking, my own son looked me in the eye and said, "You widow, just a burden now." That same night, he emptied my checkbook. 3 weeks later, I opened a business out of my garage with nothing but 2 grandkids, a folding table, and spite. Now, my son works for me. And today, he just asked if I'd consider making him a partner. Should I say yes or remind him? Who kept the lights on when he walked away? You decide. What happened next might surprise you. So don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell me where you're listening from. Thanks. My name's Helen Parker. I'm 68, recently widowed, and apparently now a burden, according to my son. The funeral was a blur of casseroles, too tight hugs, and people pretending not to pity me. I remember staring at James's casket thinking how strange it was that someone could be so alive in your memory while lying stone still just a few feet away. He hated suits, by the way, said they made him itch. Yet there he was, dressed like a banker, not a mechanic, and I couldn't even roll my eyes at him for it. Everyone kept whispering how strong I looked. I wasn't strong. I was just too numb to cry in public. I did what anyone does in those moments, nodded, thanked people for coming, accepted deviled eggs from strangers, and tried not to fall apart until I was alone. I didn't expect Derek to be the one who broke me first. He'd been distant for years, ever since he married Amanda and moved across town. I figured he was grieving too, that maybe he'd show up for once not as a half-resentful son, but as a man who lost his father. That hope lasted until we got home from the service, when he pulled me aside in the kitchen, still wearing his damn sunglasses indoors like he was too cool to make eye contact. "You can't keep living like this, Ma. What, are you gonna live off Social Security and casseroles? You're a widow now, just a burden on me." That's what he said. No build-up, no warning. Just threw it out there like he was reading off a weather report. I stared at him, blinked, waited for the punchline. It never came. He meant it. And the worst part? He looked almost relieved to finally say it out loud. I didn't say anything back. I just watched him grab another sandwich, kiss his kids, and leave with Amanda trailing behind him like she couldn't get out fast enough either. That night, I sat in James's old chair, the one with the squeaky armrest and the burn mark from when he tried to fix the toaster while holding a cigarette. I watched reruns of Jeopardy, on mute, and stared at nothing. My hands kept moving, though, folding napkins we didn't use, sorting silverware that didn't matter. That's grief, I guess. Your heart's screaming, but your hands just want something to do. I thought about calling my sister, but she'd just say what everyone says. Give it time. Time doesn't pay the mortgage. Time doesn't stop your son from looking at you like dead weight. Time sure as hell doesn't bring back your best friend who used to sneak you Snickers when you had a bad day. The next morning, I found myself putting on lipstick for no reason. Just sat at the mirror and did it. Ruby sunset, the shade James liked. I looked ridiculous, sitting in my robe with bright red lips, but it made me feel visible, I guess. Like if I could still see myself. Maybe I hadn't completely disappeared. I wandered out to the garage, more out of habit than purpose, and saw James's old workshop bench. Still cluttered, still smelled like motor oil and coffee. There was a small note stuck under a wrench. "Don't forget the chili cook-off next month. Bring Helen's cornbread." His handwriting. I stood there a long time. Later that week, I got a letter from the bank. Apparently, James had missed a few payments I didn't know about. The house wasn't mine free and clear like I'd thought. I'd have to come up with something, fast. But how? I had no job, no income, and a reputation as just a sweet church lady who bakes well. That's when the thought crept in. Maybe Derek was right. Maybe I was a burden now. But then Mia, my 8-year-old granddaughter, came over that afternoon and asked if she could help me bake cookies to make Grandpa smell happy again. I cried into a mixing bowl while pretending it was just the onions from lunch. And that night, something shifted. I started writing down ideas, not business plans exactly, just thoughts. What if I started selling baked goods? What if I offered little community dinners? What if I could turn all this pain, this uselessness, into something useful again? I didn't know what I was doing. I just knew I couldn't sit in that house waiting for life to happen anymore. And maybe, just maybe, there was still a version of me out there that wasn't just someone's mother or someone's widow. I didn't know it yet, but that was the night everything started to change. The day after Derek's little speech, the house felt colder, like something essential had been scooped out and taken with James. I woke up too early again, sat in bed pretending I was still tired, because admitting I was wide awake meant facing another day alone. The quiet was unnatural. No coffee brewing, no sports radio humming from the kitchen, no James cursing softly as he tried to fix something he probably should have left alone. I shuffled to the kitchen and reached for his mug out of habit, the one with the chipped handle and faded '1 Grandpa logo from Father's Day 2011. I poured myself a cup, took one sip, and immediately set it down. It tasted like cardboard, or maybe it was just me. I sat there for a while, staring out the window, watching the neighbor's dog chase squirrels like nothing had changed. That's the worst part of grief, how the world just keeps spinning while yours falls apart. I was halfway through making a grocery list I had no intention of using when I remembered the mortgage letter. I'd shoved it into the drawer under the phone a few days earlier, thinking I'd deal with it later. But now there was no one else to deal with it. So I pulled it out, skimmed it, and suddenly wished I hadn't. Apparently James had refinanced the house 6 months ago, and there was still a hefty chunk left. I had maybe 2 months before things got serious. I didn't understand all the numbers, but the bold words, "final notice," didn't need translation. I called the bank thinking, maybe there'd been a mistake, or that I could talk to someone human about options. The woman on the other end sounded like she was reading from a script and not especially thrilled about it. "Mrs. Parker, the payments haven't been made since March." I told her James had passed away. She said she was sorry for my loss, then asked if I wanted to set up a payment plan. I hung up before I started crying again. After that, I walked through the house like a stranger in a museum, touching picture frames, lifting old coats that still smelled faintly of cologne, opening drawers just to hear them squeak. In the hall closet, I found an old cardboard box labeled "Shop Tax Stuff." Inside were a bunch of oil-stained receipts, a few wrenches, and tucked between an old ledger and a faded photo of James and a man I didn't recognize, a handwritten envelope with my name on it. No stamp, no address, just Helen. My hands shook a little when I opened it. It was from Frank Delaney, James's old foreman from the auto shop he retired from 5 years back. I hadn't thought about Frank in ages. Inside was a short note in messy block letters. "James asked me to hold on to this in case anything happened to him. Call me if you're reading this." Attached was a folded-up check for $10,000, dated just 2 weeks before James passed. My first thought was, why the hell didn't he tell me about this? My second was, why was the check never cashed? I called Frank. His voice was slower than I remembered, raspier but kind. I told James I'd drop that off myself. He said he'd do it. Must have slipped his mind. I asked him if the check was still good. He sighed. I canceled it when he didn't cash it. Thought maybe he changed his mind. I didn't get angry. Not at Frank, not even at James. Just sat there on the edge of the bed, clutching that useless check, trying to understand why James would have kept something like that from me. Pride? Fear? Denial? He was always the one who handled the finances. I'd trusted that, maybe too much. Later that night, I opened James's laptop for the first time since he passed. It took me 10 tries to guess his password. It was Corvette 1979. Of course it was. And when I finally got in, I started combing through his files, emails, anything that might explain what he'd been thinking. Instead, I found dozens of bookmarked YouTube videos about starting a small food business in retirement, tutorials on community kitchens, event hosting, even beginner accounting tips. I sat there, stunned. I had no idea he'd even considered something like that. Then I saw a draft email addressed to me, never sent. It read, "If anything happens before I get this going, maybe you'll take it and run with it. You're the people person. I'm just the wrench guy." I laughed, choked, and cried all at once. That night, I slept in his recliner, laptop still, open on my lap, with the soft hum of a video playing about how to register a sole proprietorship. I didn't know what I was doing, but the seed had been planted. I wasn't just losing things anymore. I was starting to find them too. And maybe, just maybe, I wasn't completely alone in this after all. 2 days after I found that draft email, I was back in the kitchen, still wearing the same sweatshirt from yesterday, staring at the stack of bills like they might disappear if I ignored them hard enough. The idea James had toyed with, this little food business thing, kept circling my mind like a fly I couldn't swat. I mean, me? Start a business? I hadn't worked since 1993 unless you count PTA bake sales and running the church potluck sign-up sheet like a military operation. But something about it stuck. He believed in it enough to research it, enough to leave that half-written email. And somewhere between desperation and not wanting Derek to be right about me, I opened a new browser tab and typed in how to start a food business after 60. You'd be surprised how many stories pop up, moms turning into bakers, grandmas starting catering services, widows like me who just didn't want to fade into the background. One article stood out about this woman, Rhonda Jackson, in Detroit, who started meal prepping for neighbors and turned it into a full catering company with 6 employees. Her husband had passed too. She said grief was the spark, but purpose was the fire. That line kept bouncing around in my brain all day. By the afternoon, I'd made a list of what I had. James's old workshop space, which was dusty but still solid, a kitchen with good bones, and 2 grandkids who liked to stir things and spill flour on the floor. I didn't have money, not really, but I had time and stubbornness and apparently some grief-fueled motivation. So I did it. I drove down to the local SBA center, that small concrete building near the post office that I always assumed was just for paperwork junkies or people with clipboards. The receptionist, a tired-looking woman named Dina with a bright green scarf, didn't blink when I said I was interested in starting a food business. "You and half the neighborhood," she muttered, then handed me a packet and directed me to a seminar happening in the back room. It was me, 4 other confused-looking people, and a man in a checkered blazer named Steve who spoke entirely in bullet points. I didn't understand half the lingo. Profit margins, overhead costs, LLC versus sole prop. But I took notes like my life depended on it, because in a way, it did. When I got home, I called Mia and Luke over and asked if they wanted to help me. Brainstorm names. Mia suggested Grandma's Food, which Luke quickly upgraded to Super Grandma's Hot Stuff, which I gently vetoed. We eventually landed on Parker's Pantry and Events, simple, personal, and gave me room to grow. I went online and registered the name for $35 using James's old PayPal account. I even printed out a little certificate that said Business Owner, Helen Parker. It felt fake, like a costume, but also kind of thrilling. The next step was finding a space. I considered using our kitchen, but the oven was temperamental, and I didn't want the health inspector giving me a stroke. That's when I remembered the old storage unit behind James's workshop, a dusty old space we hadn't touched in years. I walked in, swept out a few cobwebs, and imagined tables, a small prep station, maybe a fridge in the corner. It smelled like motor oil and cardboard, but I could picture it, just barely. I told myself, if I could make it through raising Derek, I could handle this. I spent the next few days making flyers with Mia's help, advertising small bites and big smiles. Community dinners, birthdays, backyard events. I printed 20 of them at the library and walked the neighborhood hanging them up while Mia carried the tape dispenser like it was a trophy. I started getting a few calls, nothing huge, mostly curious neighbors asking if I'd cater their church group or help host a baby shower. I said yes to all of it. I didn't even have a working oven yet, but it was happening. I felt like I was moving again, like someone had jump-started me with jumper cables. Then, one night, as I was scrubbing the ancient linoleum floor in the workshop, I heard the screen door creak open behind me. Derek stood there, arms crossed, looking around the room like he'd walked into a crime scene. "What the hell is this?" he asked. I stood up slowly, wiping my hands on a dish towel. "This," I said, "is what a burden does with her free time." He didn't laugh, just shook his head and muttered something about wasting money. Then he turned around and walked out, not even waiting for me to respond. I stood there for a long minute, heart pounding, hands shaking, not from fear, but from fury. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel sad. I felt pissed off. And oddly, that felt like progress. That night, I filed my official business registration and emailed Steve from the SBA class to ask about licenses. I didn't know how this was going to work. I just knew it had to, because I was done being seen as dead weight. I was going to make something out of this mess, and if Derek didn't like it, he could keep walking. The next morning, I woke up, sore in places I forgot existed. Arms from scrubbing, legs from climbing up and down a step stool, to dust shelves in James's old workshop, which was slowly transforming into my new prep area, or at least the fantasy version of one. I made coffee that didn't taste like cardboard this time and sat down with a legal pad to map out my first official event, a backyard birthday party for a neighbor's 7-year-old twins, a gig that paid in both cash and leftover balloons. Apparently, Mia and Luke were already at the table when I started sketching out table layouts, both of them munching on cereal like tiny consultants, offering ideas with the seriousness of people twice their size. Mia thought we should serve heart-shaped cookies with edible glitter. Luke suggested hot dogs that looked like octopuses. I nodded like a CEO and jotted both down. Around noon, I went out back to take some measurements when I noticed the door to the garage slightly ajar, which was odd because I always kept it locked now that I was storing new supplies in there. Folding chairs, paper goods, a new hand mixer. I'd bought with the deposit from the birthday party. I walked in and stopped cold. Boxes had been opened, my receipts were scattered across the floor, and the folder with my event contracts was gone. My first thought was break-in, but there was no forced entry and nothing valuable, just paperwork and a $50 mixer. I felt my stomach twist. That's when I checked the desk drawer in the kitchen where I'd been keeping my checkbook and found it missing too. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but I didn't have to. Derek called that evening, his voice already defensive. I took the checks, he said like he was telling me the weather. You needed a wake-up call, Ma. You're throwing money at some fantasy. It's embarrassing. I just stood there, holding the cordless phone, staring at the pot of spaghetti. I'd been boiling, realizing I no longer had the capacity to be shocked by anything he said. You stole from me, I finally said. No, he snapped. I protected you. You're welcome. Then he hung up. I stared at the phone for a while before slowly placing it back in the cradle, like it might explode. That night, I didn't sleep. I laid in bed, staring at the ceiling, running every possible reaction through my head. From driving to his house and throwing a bag of flour at his door, to doing nothing at all and letting this whole dream die quietly. But in the middle of that spiral, I heard a small knock at my bedroom door. It was Mia, in her pajamas, holding a crumpled drawing that said Grandma's Pantry with little hearts and glitter all over it. I made signs for your party, she whispered, so people know it's real. And just like that, the decision was made. I wasn't quitting. The next day, I called the landlord of the space connected to James's workshop and explained what I was doing, expecting him to either jack up the rent or hang up. Instead, he said he'd seen my flyers and asked if I could cater his niece's baby shower in 2 weeks. I agreed instantly, already calculating how many meatballs I could make on a stovetop. That afternoon, I took my last $100 and bought a small folding table, a stack of chafing dishes, and a new receipt book. When I got home, there was a letter on the porch taped to the door, a warning notice from the same landlord stating that I'd violated some clause in the lease by running a business without formal zoning. I felt the panic rise again, but something about the timing was too perfect. Derek had seen that space. Derek knew what I was planning. And now, suddenly, a zoning complaint? I called the landlord back, calmly, and asked who filed the complaint. He hesitated before admitting it was submitted anonymously, but came from within the family. I didn't say a word. I just thanked him and hung up. I didn't cry this time. I didn't rage either. I just made tea, sat on the porch, and watched Mia draw smiley faces on a stack of paper cups for the birthday party. Because if Derek wanted a war, he was going to get one. But not with yelling, not with tears. I'd fight the only way I knew. How? By proving him wrong, with every cookie, every RSVP, every time someone smiled and said, "This is exactly what we needed." Because I may be a widow, but I wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. By the time the backyard birthday rolled around, I had 6 folding chairs, 4 mismatched plastic tables, and 1 rented cotton candy machine that sounded like it might catch fire if I asked it to do anything too ambitious, but somehow it all worked. I showed up with Mia and Luke in matching aprons, a cooler full of finger sandwiches, and a tray of cookies shaped like stars because I couldn't find a heart-shaped cutter that hadn't rusted. The twins' mom hugged me so tight I nearly dropped. The lemonade jug, and within 20 minutes, there were kids everywhere, sticky and screaming in that chaotic way that somehow feels like joy when you're standing far enough away. I ran the whole event like a general at war, delegating tasks, refilling napkins, managing balloon-related crises with surgical calm. I caught Derek's wife, Amanda, standing off to the side at one point, watching the whole thing with a complicated look on her face, not quite disapproval, not quite admiration. I smiled and waved. She waved back, hesitantly. After everyone left and we were cleaning up confetti from places where confetti should never be, the twins' mom pressed a folded check into my hand and whispered, "This was the first time they smiled since the divorce. Thank you." I didn't even look at the amount until I got home, $200. I stared at it like it might vanish. It wasn't much, but it was money I earned doing something I built from scratch. And for the first time in a while, I felt not just useful, but proud. The next day, I made a post in the local neighborhood Facebook group thanking folks for the support and casually mentioned that Parker's Pantry was available for small events, especially for families on a budget. I included a few pictures Mia had taken on my phone, shaky but charming, and hit post. By that evening, the post had been shared 17 times, and I had 6 messages in my inbox asking for quotes, menus, and if I did, baby showers, church, picnics, or even themed brunches. I didn't have answers to half of it, but I replied yes to every single one, then immediately got to work researching how to do all of the above. Over the next 2 weeks, I catered a book club meeting, an anniversary, dinner in someone's garage, and a neighborhood potluck where I made enough macaroni and cheese to feed the postal service. Word started spreading, and not just on Facebook. A local food blogger named Dana, who wrote for a site called Eat Local, Eat Loud, showed up at the potluck, snapped a few photos, and did a write-up titled From Widow to Whisk, The Story of Parker's Pantry. It went semi-viral in our little town way, and the next day, I got 3 more bookings and a call from someone asking if I wanted to do a pop-up booth at the monthly farmers market. I said yes, before I even knew where I'd get the equipment. Derek found out about it the following weekend. I was at the workshop doing test batches of lemon bars when I heard the screen door slam. He walked in without knocking, looking around, like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. "So this is it?" he asked, gesturing to the space like it personally offended him. "You're really doing this?" I kept mixing. "Yep. You're feeding strangers in a garage and calling it a business." He said it like it was a joke. I paused, looked him in the eye, and said, "Strangers who pay. Strangers who smile when they leave." He opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked tired, like something else was bothering him, but I didn't ask. I didn't owe him softness right then. He left without saying anything else, just shook his head and walked out. That week, the farmer's market was a blur. Tables of jams and tomatoes, old couples arguing about zucchini, kids begging for snow cones. My booth was wedged between a honey vendor and a lady who sold birdhouses shaped like famous landmarks. Laid out trays of mini quiches, brownie bites, and something I called grief granola bars as a joke, which turned out to be the best seller. By noon, I was out of everything. Dana from the blog came by again and asked if I'd consider doing a feature video. I almost dropped a tray of lemon tarts. She filmed me the next day in the kitchen, talking about James, about Mia and Luke, about what it meant to find purpose again when you thought you were too old to be anything but invisible. It was raw and honest, and when it went live, the comments poured in. Dozens of women saying they felt seen, inspired, like maybe they could start something too. I cried over a mixing bowl again. Then I took a deep breath, washed my hands, and started planning for the baby shower that weekend. Because this wasn't just a hobby anymore. It was real, and I was just getting started. The morning of the corporate gala call started like any other. I was elbows deep in a batch of cinnamon rolls, the kitchen filled with the kind of buttery warmth that makes you feel like everything might actually be okay. When the phone rang, and I wiped my hands on my apron to answer, expecting it to be another birthday inquiry, or maybe Dina from the SBA Center with one of her passive-aggressive zoning reminders. But instead, it was a woman named Clarissa from a local tech firm I'd never heard of, saying they needed catering for a small corporate event next Friday, about 50 people. Nothing too fancy, but classy and homey, which felt like my entire brand if you cut it open with a knife. I said yes so fast I think I scared her, then scribbled everything down on the back of a grocery receipt, already calculating how much I'd need to scale up my meatball recipe. Later that afternoon, I was reorganizing the dry goods shelves when Derek showed up again, this time without warning and without Amanda. Just him leaning in the doorway like he hadn't just insulted my entire existence 2 weeks ago. "I heard about the gala," he said, not smiling but not sneering either, more curious than anything. I nodded, trying to look busy with a bag of lentils I didn't need. "Yeah, kind of a big deal for me." He hesitated, then offered, "You're gonna need help?" That stopped me. I turned to look at him, raising one eyebrow the way James used to when someone was full of it. "You offering?" He shrugged, that same old teenage boy in a grown man body stance he always defaulted to, when he was trying to act like things didn't matter. Just saying I've planned stuff like this before, at my job. That was a surprise. I didn't know his job even involved event planning. I gave him a long look, weighing the risks, then handed him a clipboard with the guest count and food list. "You screw this up, I'll make you wear a hairnet and clean grease traps for a week." He didn't laugh, but he didn't leave either, and that was something. The next few days passed in a whirlwind. Menu planning, bulk shopping runs, testing out new finger food displays with Mia and Luke, offering taste test reviews that mostly involved licking things and declaring them too crunchy, or not purple enough. Derek showed up each day, sometimes early, always in that cautious, don't push me posture. But he helped. He reorganized the supply closet, streamlined the prep schedule, even created a spreadsheet with color-coded timers, which I teased him for relentlessly but secretly found impressive. For the first time in years, we weren't fighting. We weren't hugging either, but we were moving in the same direction, which felt like a miracle. Then, 2 nights before the event, I got the email. The client was pulling out. Something about a conflict of interest with another caterer who'd offered a last-minute discount. I stared at the screen for a long time before showing it to Derek, who read it and went very still. I asked if he knew anything. He hesitated just a second too long, then said, "It's probably just bad luck." But his eyes were too flat, too careful, and something in my gut twisted. I didn't push. What was the point? Whether he sabotaged it directly or let someone else do it didn't matter. The job was gone, and I was back at square one. I went home and sat at the kitchen table, staring at my planner, every slot for that weekend suddenly empty, feeling like the air had been sucked out of the room. Mia wandered in with a drawing of a meatball superhero and asked if we were still doing the big fancy dinner, and I didn't have the heart to tell her no, so I just smiled and said, "Not that one, but maybe another." That night, I stayed. Up late, rewriting my whole pricing structure, mapping out smaller packages, brainstorming how to pitch local libraries or nonprofits who might need cheap catering. I refused to fall apart. I'd been dropped too many times to let one corporate flakeout ruin me. And somewhere deep down, I knew I'd been right not to trust Derek fully yet. He was helping, maybe even trying. But that old pride in him, the one that couldn't handle seeing me win without his name on it, was still there, hiding just under the surface. The next morning, I got a call from the community center. Someone had read the blog article and wanted to know if I could host a senior luncheon next weekend. I said yes without even asking about the budget, because I needed to move forward. I needed momentum. I needed to prove to myself, and maybe to Derek too, that I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building, and nothing, not even sabotage wrapped in family guilt, was going to stop me. The day after the corporate gala collapsed, I walked into the workshop-turned-kitchen with a mop in one hand and a binder in the other, determined not to waste a single second feeling sorry for myself because grief already stole enough of my time and I wasn't about to let disappointment join the party. I spent the morning deep cleaning every surface, scrubbing frustration out of the floor tiles like they were personally responsible for my setbacks, then reorganized the entire pantry, while muttering recipes under my breath like they were battle chants. I called the community center to confirm the luncheon and immediately started planning a menu that felt welcoming but not patronizing. Chicken salad sliders, tomato basil soup in little paper cups, and sugar cookies shaped like teapots, because I figured seniors deserved whimsy too. I didn't have help lined up, and the thought of trying to cook for 60 people solo made my chest tight. But I figured I'd ask the neighborhood teens or bribe Mia and Luke with extra iPad time. I was knee-deep in mixing dough when Amanda showed up unannounced, holding a half-empty Tupperware container and looking nervous, which was strange for a woman who usually acted like she was immune to awkwardness. "These were good," she said, setting it down on the counter like it might explode. "From the birthday party, Mia brought them over." I blinked. "Thanks?" She shifted, then blurted, "You're really doing this, like it's real." I shrugged, but my throat felt tight. "Trying to." Then, like she'd practiced the line in the car, she said, "Derek's been weird lately, quiet, kind of ashamed, I think." I didn't reply. I wasn't ready to unpack that particular suitcase. But before she left, she turned back and said, "He's watching, just so you know." That night I barely slept, my mind juggling grocery lists, volunteer, ideas, and whether I could get away with borrowing chairs from the church again. By morning, I had a plan. I called Dina at the SBA Center to ask if there were any youth volunteer programs in the area, and 2 hours later, she connected me with a high school culinary club that needed community service hours. I met with them in the parking lot that afternoon, a gaggle of teenagers in oversized chef jackets with more energy than direction, and I almost cried from relief. They were loud and occasionally chaotic, but they showed up ready to peel vegetables and pipe frosting like champs, and when I promised them pizza after the luncheon, they practically cheered. The next few days were a flurry of prep, me teaching knife skills while dodging flying carrot tops, teenagers bickering over who got to use the electric mixer, Mia and Luke decorating the cookie boxes with stickers shaped like smiley faces and musical notes. On the morning of the luncheon, the sky threatened rain, but held off just long enough for us to load everything into 3 borrowed minivans and haul it across town. The community center kitchen was ancient and smelled faintly of boiled cabbage, but we made it work. I set up the tables with dollar store centerpieces and printed menus Mia designed, and by noon, the room was full of seniors laughing, clapping, and complimenting the soup like it was 5-star cuisine. I watched them eat and thought, this is what James meant. This is what he saw before I did. I was wiping down a counter when I noticed Derek standing near the back wall, arms crossed, expression unreadable. He hadn't told me he was coming. He just stood there, watching as one of the high schoolers ladled soup with a concentration usually reserved for surgery, while Mia proudly explained the cookie process to a white-haired woman in a crocheted shawl. I walked over, not sure what to say. Before I could speak, he beat me to it. "You need help?" he asked, and for once, there wasn't an edge to it. Just a simple question. I handed him a tray. "Take this to table 3. They're asking for more sliders." And just like that, without ceremony or speech, we worked side by side for the UI. Next hour, passing plates and refilling napkins and dodging spilled lemonade. He didn't complain. He didn't sabotage. He just helped. Later, as we packed up, one of the teens asked if we were business partners. I started to laugh, but Derek said, "Not yet," and gave me this look, half challenge, half apology. I didn't answer. I didn't need to, because something had shifted, small but real, and I wasn't about to jinx it with too many words. That night, I went home exhausted but light, my feet aching and my heart oddly full. I had a list of bookings. For the next month, a volunteer crew that might stick around, and maybe, just maybe, a son who was starting to understand what I'd been building, not just for me, but for all of us. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was fighting alone. The Monday after the luncheon, I was back in the kitchen before sunrise, watching the coffee drip like it was the only thing holding me together. still riding the strange high of seeing Derek carry that tray without making a face like it was beneath him. Still not entirely sure how to feel about it, but cautiously hopeful, like maybe something cracked open between us that could actually grow into something useful. I had a full week ahead. 2 small events, a pop-up at the church fair, and a request for a rustic tea party from a woman who sounded suspiciously like she'd just watched a Hallmark marathon. But instead of panic, I felt this quiet momentum building, like the gears had finally started turning in sync. Derek showed up mid-morning, holding a box of supplies from the bulk store and looking like he hadn't quite decided whether this was a real job or a temporary truce. But he started unloading without being asked, lining up plastic containers, and double-checking inventory like someone who'd done this before. And I just let him. Didn't say much, just offered him a cup of coffee, which he accepted with a half-smile that felt bigger than it looked. We worked together all day, mostly in silence, with the occasional bicker over labeling systems or who moved the spice rack again. And it was the kind of productive tension that used to only exist between me and James when we tried to assemble. Furniture without a manual, frustrating but weirdly intimate. Around noon, Mia wandered in after school and immediately began bossing us around like a 4-foot-tall kitchen manager, directing tray placements and reminding Derek to wash his hands before touching the frosting, which he actually did without rolling his eyes, and that alone felt like progress. That evening, we catered a small outdoor dinner for a book club, just 10 women in lawn chairs talking about memoirs and menopause. And as the sun dipped behind the trees, Derek handled plating while I served drinks, both of us moving in rhythm, passing plates and exchanging nods like we'd been doing this for years. At one point, one of the women stopped me and said, "Your son has a good eye for presentation. Those mini quiches look like something out of a magazine." And I looked over at him, sleeves rolled up, squinting at a tray like it personally offended him, and I just nodded. Yeah, he's better than he thinks. Later, as we packed up, Derek pulled out his phone and snapped a picture of the spread. Then another of me wiping down the table with Mia, making bunny ears behind my head, and I didn't think much of it until I got home and saw that he'd posted it to Instagram with the caption, "Mom's pantry is saving my life, one meatball at a time." I stared at it for a long time, rereading it like it might disappear, heart lodged somewhere between pride and disbelief, then opened the comments and saw dozens of likes and replies from his friends, some surprised, some supportive, all genuine. That post did something. Over the next few days, I started getting DMs from strangers, people asking if we were hiring, if we catered weddings, if we needed interns, if we did shipping. I couldn't answer fast enough. Derek started showing up earlier, staying later, even bringing his own ideas, simplifying menus, redesigning the logo, helping Luke set up a basic website that actually looked professional. One night, we stayed late testing recipes for a holiday event, and he told me about the friend who'd tanked the gala deal, how he hadn't known until it was too late, and how guilty he'd felt ever since. And I didn't yell or cry, I just nodded and kept stirring the cranberry glaze, because sometimes forgiveness comes in silence, not speeches. The truth was, I'd already forgiven him, not because he deserved it right away, but because holding on to that anger was like carrying a hot pan with no gloves. Eventually, it just burns you. By Friday, we had our biggest event yet, a school fundraiser with over 100 people, and we handled it like pros, running trays, answering questions, smoothing over chaos when the lemonade dispenser broke and soaked the raffle table, and when it was all done, we stood in the parking lot eating leftover brownies off a paper plate, too tired to talk, but too wired to leave. Derek looked over at me and said, "You know, this is the first time I've felt like I wasn't screwing something up." And I didn't say anything for a moment, just handed him another brownie and said, "You're not." And I meant it. Because this wasn't just a business anymore. It was a lifeline. For him, for me, for all of us. And for the first time since James died, I didn't feel like I was trying to fill a hole. I felt like I was building something new. Together. The week after the school fundraiser felt like riding a bike downhill without brakes. Fast, unpredictable, but thrilling in a way that made my hands shake with excitement instead of fear for the first time in a long while. And every morning, I woke up to a phone full of notifications, emails asking about availability, inquiries from local groups, even a message from a wedding planner who wanted to collaborate, which made me laugh out loud because the only thing I'd ever collaborated on was Christmas dinner, and even that usually ended in mashed potato debates. Derek started coming in before I even had the coffee ready, laptop open, planner out, wearing that old high school hoodie he refused to throw out, but now paired with a Bluetooth headset and a to-do list, and he worked like someone who finally believed he belonged here, like someone who'd stopped waiting for permission to be useful. Mia took on the unofficial title of decor boss, drawing up menu boards with glitter markers and asking every client their favorite color like it was a legally binding contract. And Luke, bless him, learned how to fold napkins into the shape of flowers and insisted on teaching the seniors at the next luncheon. Things weren't perfect. There were burnt cookies, last-minute cancellations, a near disaster involving a batch of seafood salad left too close to a heat lamp. But we rolled with it, laughed through it, and fixed what needed fixing without falling apart. It wasn't just the business that was growing. It was us. One evening, after a long day prepping for a charity brunch, we all sat on the back porch eating leftover sliders, and Derek looked over, quiet for a moment, then said, "I owe you an apology for everything, for not believing in you." "For what?" I said after Dad's funeral. I didn't say anything right away, just sipped my tea and looked at him, really looked, at the man who once dismissed me as a burden and now showed up every day ready to build something alongside me. "That was a hell of a thing to say," I finally replied, and he nodded like he knew I wasn't going to sugarcoat it. "But," I added, "I'm glad you're here. I'm proud of what we're doing." He smiled, a small thing, but honest, and that meant more than any big speech ever could. The next day, while reorganizing some files, I got a call from our lawyer, which confused me because I hadn't reached out in weeks, and his voice was calm but firm as he explained that something new had come up. Apparently, James had left, behind a separate asset that had been tied up in some administrative delay, a small workshop property right next to our current space, fully paid off and registered in my name. I sat down mid-sentence, heart pounding, the words barely sinking in as he explained the legal formalities and next steps, and when I finally hung up, I just stared out the window at the little alley between our building and the one next door, realizing that James had done one final thing to help me, even from beyond. When I told Derek, he didn't say much at first, just stared at the empty space like he could already see the blueprints forming in his mind. "You know," he said, "eventually, we could turn it into a teaching kitchen, offer classes, bring in guest cooks, make it a real community hub." I laughed, partly because the idea was brilliant, and partly because it was his, not mine. And I loved that we'd reached a place where it didn't matter whose idea started things, just that we moved forward together. That weekend, after our final event of the month, a Grandparents' Day picnic that involved 3 types of lemonade and way too many folding chairs, we all walked over to the new property with a set of old keys and a box of donuts and stepped inside for the first time. It was dusty, full of spiderwebs and broken shelves, but the bones were good, and the air felt charged, like it was waiting for us to decide what came next. Mia ran around measuring things with her arms, declaring where the sprinkle station would go, and Luke pointed out a spot that would be perfect for a cookie decorating counter. Derek just stood in the middle, hands on hips, smiling like a man who saw a future where a wall used to be. And I stood there too, breathing it all in, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not grief, not survival, not even pride. Exactly, but something deeper. Legacy. James had built a life for us, and now we were building the next chapter. We spent the next few weeks turning James's old workshop into something that looked nothing like a workshop and everything like a new beginning, hauling out rusted tools, knocking down the warped shelving he never got around to fixing, and scrubbing layers of dust off the windows until sunlight actually came through for once, and as we worked, the space started to breathe again, like it was exhaling years of silence and waiting for something real to happen. Derek handled the structural stuff, calling in his contractor buddy to fix the wiring, building a counter from reclaimed wood, measuring every wall like he was prepping for a Food Network segment. And I focused on the things that made a place feel warm, picking out colors that didn't scream institutional, laying out laminated recipe cards, and hanging up photos of our earliest events, Mia's cookies, Luke's lemonade stand, and a blurry shot of the first meal we ever served. Together, back when none of us knew what we were doing but did it anyway. Word started spreading, slow and steady, and people began asking about classes, widows who'd never cooked for one, young couples trying to eat better, teenagers looking to learn a skill that didn't involve staring at a phone screen, and before we even opened the doors officially, we had a wait list for the first community session. We called it Parker's Pantry Collective, because it wasn't just mine anymore, and it wasn't just a business either. It was a shared place, stitched together second home for anyone who needed a warm plate, a good laugh, or just a reminder that they still mattered. On opening day, I stood out front with Derek, Mia, and Luke, each of us wearing aprons with our names hand-stitched by one of the seniors from the luncheon program, and we cut the ribbon with a pair of dull office scissors because we forgot to. Buy real ones, but nobody cared. People clapped, someone brought flowers, and the air smelled like cinnamon rolls and fried zucchini, which somehow worked together in a weirdly perfect way. Inside, the kitchen buzzed with energy. Derek ran the first demo, showing a group how to prep a week's worth of meals on a budget, while Mia floated from station to station, reminding people to use the glitter responsibly. And Luke managed the sign-in sheet like a tiny executive, complete with a clipboard and serious eyebrows. I stood back for a moment, just watching, letting the noise and motion wash over me, feeling something settle in my chest that I hadn't known was missing. Peace, maybe, or satisfaction, or that quiet pride that comes when you realize you didn't just survive something hard. You built something beautiful because of it. James would have loved this, I thought. Would have teased me about my obsessive labeling system and made jokes about hippie food culture. But he would have helped. Fixed the leaky faucet and handed out cookies when no one was looking. And in some strange way, I felt like he was still part of it all. At the end of the day, after the last guest left and we'd finished sweeping up sprinkles and folding chairs, Derek handed me a cup of tea and said, "You did it, Ma. You really did it." And I looked around at the space we'd created. The people it brought together, the way it hummed with life, and I corrected him, gently but firmly. No, we did. Because for all the hurt, all the fights, all the years we'd wasted not hearing each other, we found our way back through cinnamon and spreadsheets, through burnt muffins and forgiveness, and now, standing there in the glow of overhead lights and fresh paint, I knew this wasn't just the end of a chapter. It was the beginning of something lasting. Not just a business, not even just a legacy. A life, a full, imperfect, beautiful life I built after being told I was a burden. And now, I was the boss, the builder, the matriarch of Parker's Pantry, and I wasn't going anywhere.